Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Late Night Show with Dr. Kojo. Today is not a late night show, though. It's a midday show for those of us here in California. But I know if you're checking in from the East Coast, it might be getting a little late. I know it's 5:30 out there. But we have a very exciting topic tonight. We're going to be talking about unconscious bias. Oh, I guess that was my own notification on my phone. We're going to be discussing unconscious bias on social media. My words are not coming out properly, but they'll come out properly eventually. And I want you all to go ahead and introduce yourself and let me know where you're checking in from. And I'm going to bring on the two guests so that they can introduce themselves. So we have people checking in from everywhere: Emmanuel, Kiana, Alyssa. Laura, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Southern Illinois, Sacramento, Kayla. Okay. Anybody on the East Coast? Let me see where everybody is checking in from. Almost 5 in New Orleans. Okay, so I think that's Central Time. Cleveland, Ohio, school psychologist, San Diego, Maine, Virginia, Arizona. I love this topic. Yes, this is going to be a great topic, and there's some recent news that we want to cover. And as somebody who, I do social media, for a living, I think this is a very important topic, especially during Black History Month. So we're definitely going to get into it. And as always, we're streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. But the primary platform is Facebook, of course. New Hampshire, Chicago, Berkeley, Fort Worth, Jacksonville, Toronto. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. And I want to introduce a guest, and we'll hop right into the topic. So let's go ahead and bring everybody in. How's everybody doing?
Good. Thank you for having us.
No, doing well, Kojo. Treat to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. Can you say it again?
I said it's a treat to be here with you both. Thank you for having us, and I really look forward to this conversation. It's been
I appreciate it. Yeah. And when I got the text from Dr. J yesterday about the topic, I was like, oh, this works out because I missed Wednesday's episode. So I was going to do a bonus Friday episode anyway. And then the topic was, is actually relevant. And I saw the news, but I kind of thought it was fake until I got the text from Judith yesterday. So we can go ahead and start with Dr. Ramsey, and then Dr. J can reintroduce herself again.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Drew Ramsey. I'm a psychiatrist, and I know Dr. Kojo and Dr. J, both mostly from social media, but also just from being another mental health professional, not doing it as well as they do, but trying to keep up and just have the positive voice out here in social media about mental health. My focus is really mostly for my career. I'm a clinician, so I see a lot of patients, but I've also been focused on nutrition and mental health. It's just something we can do in our everyday life. It's really my dream to teach Kojo to cook, and so
I love it.
You said we would sometime, and so
we need to.
And then I'm really interested in male mental health. I've got a Friday Sessions, which is an Instagram series on male mental health. Really great series where we've gotten to interview all kinds of interesting men and women about male mental health. And then I'm a Columbia trained psychiatrist. So I trained at Columbia. This whole thing has been going down at Columbia. I'm still on the faculty at Columbia and have taught there. I'm not as active as I used to be, but have helped out a lot over the years with their work and their media work in particular. So I'm really happy to be here with Dr. J and Kojo talking about what's going on.
I appreciate it. And before we get to Dr. J, I was talking to my mom about, how much money I spent on food. And she was like, I thought you were going to cook. And you were the reason why I don't eat processed foods now, but I have to make that switch over. So I'm getting there.
I like hearing that, Kojo. You don't eat processed foods. I've noticed you've gotten a little. It looks more whole food when you show off a little food. So that's good.
Yeah, I feel better too. So hopefully we can just make the conversion to the cooking.
What's next?
Awesome. And Dr. J, you want to reintroduce yourself to the people here on Facebook?
I'm Judith Joseph. I work with Kojo quite a bit this month. It's been a lot of fun.
Right.
Been my social media sensei. So thank you.
I appreciate it.
And I'm a huge fan of Drew. We both trained at Columbia. And, when I meet my patients, whether or not they're adolescent, children, or just families and adults, I'll prescribe things, including his book, because I really do believe in nutritional psychiatry and feeding the brain. So I'm a huge fan of yours. And I was really touched when you reached out to me, Drew, because you checked on me. You were like, just want to check on you. I know you're active with the female faculty at Columbia, and I just want to see how you're doing because this is a real blow to our department. And, how can I learn? How can I be a part of this discussion? And that just really, was very meaningful because you really showed curiosity, empathy, and if we have more people like you out there, then we can really get this dialogue going and do something about this and create change. So I'm really excited about this topic today.
Thank you, Dr. J. That's a really nice thing to say. I appreciate that.
It's awesome. And, before we even get into it, it's wild because I saw it. When it happened, I saw it, and I'll let you all describe everything that happened. But I thought it was like fake news. Because obviously I would have messaged one of you, but I thought it was fake. So I was like, oh, whatever. Is this a social media thing? And then when you said it to me, I was like, hold up. Am I seeing double, or is this not real? But it's shocking. I realized it was real yesterday for the first time. So I had that, reaction where I was finding out that it was, it did happen. So I guess I'll let Dr. J, start and, let the people know what happened and, how you feel about it personally too.
So, so for people who don't know what we're talking about, it was in the New York Times. There was an article about Jeffrey Lieberman, who is literally one of the most famous psychiatrists in the country. And he's the leader at Columbia Department of Psychiatry and a huge researcher. And he's well respected in the field. And there was a tweet where he was talking about a Black model and about how her skin was dark and how she was a work of art, kind of really objectifying her. And a lot of people started responding over Twitter saying, this is not appropriate. And, he's a leader. So you would expect, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. How did I do this? How do I fix it? But it was the opposite reaction. Instead, he doubled down on it and then, eventually deleted it. And eventually, a couple of days later, apologized. But by that time, people were so taken aback by the reaction from a leader that, the department decided to ask him to take leave. So, it kind of sent ripples throughout the psychiatry world, especially in New York and at Columbia, because I think what happened is that a lot of people started realizing that there is, this unconscious bias that, people are not really talking about. And because we don't talk about it, because we're afraid of, calling out racism and so forth, then these things continue to happen and they hurt us. And so words really do hurt, microaggressions hurt. And so this has started this conversation about, how do we address this problem in leadership? How do we address systemic racism in medicine? Because it not only impacts, doctors and staff, but it also impacts our care of patients. And, if we don't appropriately check our own biases, people literally die. Patients die. There's a lot of literature about this. So we really have to do something about it. And I'm glad to be a part of this conversation because in psychiatry in particular, we're asked to re-examine ourselves, to use empathy. So we hold ourselves to a higher standard than I think other medical professionals.
Yeah. And Dr. Ramsey, your thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that Naya Kim Gatwich was the name of the Sudanese model who was named and in this unfortunate tweet. And I think it's leading to this conversation, which that part I'm grateful for, because it's not like it's surprising that there's bias in medicine. I think a lot of us were surprised, as Dr. J is talking about, that in psychiatry, we really hold ourselves to a standard to be aware of our biases. I try to be aware of my biases and acknowledge I have them. I can do my best to learn about them. And we're held to that standard because that's the only way that we can be effective clinicians. It doesn't matter what race you are, what religion you are, what political party you are. If you have a trouble with your mental health, I will treat you and I will take excellent care of you. All of us will in mental health care. And that's a very, very important thing. And so to do that, we have to really understand the ways that we've many of us are raised in cultures that have a lot of inherent racism. I was raised in very rural Indiana. When we took part in a Black Lives Matter march, half of our homeschool group left. There's just a lot of racism in America, as everyone watching knows. But our hope is, as clinicians, to examine that, to understand that, and to, most importantly for me, Coach and Dr. J, is that everyone feels welcome and safe in the House of Mental Health. That's really important right now. And I'm glad, as we said, we're having this conversation. I don't think this is representative of this man's overall stance. But I also do not think that we can tolerate anyone in leadership who doesn't understand how egregiously harmful statements like this are.
Yeah. And, for me, when I first realized that, the news is true, I was disappointed because I thought, well, I mean, I still do believe we've made a lot of strides in psychiatry, during the pandemic, because people have, been struggling to the point where they're like, all right, I'm going to go get help. I'm going to see a professional. So I feel like before the pandemic, psychiatrists in general didn't really have a good name. And now people are like, oh, I think I want to go get help. And with the lack of, clinicians who are minorities, the weird thing with psychiatrists, at least even for me growing up, I thought of like a white male, and I'm a fan. And I tell people all the time, if you can get to any professional and they can see you, like there's such a shortage. If you can get the help, go ahead and get the help. But, for people who don't want to go to somebody that doesn't look like them, I feel like the news is devastating. And also the second thing I thought about was, if he thinks like that, who are the other powerful people in medicine who think the same exact way, but they're not speaking up, right? Like maybe he was just caught, Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to check your own bias and like people think about this, like we use the word unconscious bias because you don't want to go around saying, oh, you're a racist, right? You want people to really self-examine themselves. So there is this really cool survey you can take it's called the Harvard Implicit Bias Survey. So you can actually check your own biases. And no matter what your color, no matter where you come from, we all have our own biases. Like if I asked you to imagine that there was a neurosurgeon doing a famous surgery. A lot of us, the first thing that pops to our mind is probably going to be like a white man, right? We're not going to think about, Black woman's neurosurgeon. So we all have implicit bias. So the first step, and I think, in psychiatry, is recognizing that it's happening. So the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, put out an apology recently because there is inherent bias within the field of psychiatry. There was a time when, people didn't think that Black people had the sophisticated emotional, wherewithal to even feel depressed or to have anxiety. We know now that this prevented, Blacks from being diagnosed with things like depression or anxiety, right? Or kids from being diagnosed with things like ADHD instead of being a disruptive little Black boy, right? So, it's really important for leaders to have these type of implicit bias trainings, and then they can train the departments, and even in like the basic levels of clinics and hospitals down to like staff, right? Like the clerical staff, we all need this training. And luckily, because we realize this is a problem, these trainings have started, but they're not nationwide.
And Dr. Ramsey, any thoughts on that?
Well, Coach, I think you ask a really uncomfortable question for people in medicine, which is how racist is medicine still? And I think we all like to imagine it's gotten a lot better, as you said. It's sort of horrible as I think about you seeing this news, thinking it's fake news.
Right.
And then realizing, gosh, the idea that my field had maybe taken some steps forward, not so much in your mind. That's just a real tragedy. So I also think I'm probably the person who shouldn't be talking about it because, let's be honest, it's often white men and women who are perpetuating these. And so I think the two of you have much more experience and knowledge about how racism in medicine exists than I do.
Yeah. And I appreciate, the awareness, for you to say that and to give us a safe space to where we can talk about these things. Because I feel like a lot of times, like if let's say you're working in a hospital, because I remember I was working full time when the George Floyd thing happened, and it just felt weird and uncomfortable. Like like I don't really feel like I'm black, but until like when that happened, I felt like I was black and my white coworkers were white. Like you could really feel like the division, and as a white male, and it's interesting. Like I'm comfortable with you enough, Drew, to where I can ask you these questions. So like I feel like from our past interactions, I feel comfortable with you. But what types of things do you think or you've seen that have been successful in the past that you've done, that allows you to connect with people that don't look like you?
That's a really nice question, Kojo. I mean, I think it's something I'm still working on. I think, for one, I've really been blessed to have a diverse patient population I've gotten to work with. In particular, there's a Black woman who became my patient early in my career, and just a couple of times called me on a few things, and in a firm and caring way that really helped me become aware. So I think one is having conversations with people who don't look like you, from different cultures, who dress differently, and being curious. I have a really wonderful relationship with Greg Scott Brown, and we as I said, host the Friday sessions together for Men's Health Magazine about male mental health, and we have this phrase, curiosity before judgment. And also, as mental health professionals, like, judgment's pretty useless to me. I mean, I don't. It's not a primary need that I have in terms of judging people to maybe establish my own security. And so I think being curious. I think the other thing is I got to travel. Indiana University Medical School, where I went to medical school, has one of the longest running partnerships with an African medical school. They actually helped create a partnership with Moi University, which was the second medical school that was built in Kenya, in Eldoret, Kenya. And so it's really this just wonderful way you see when cultures experience each other, just how change happens in terms of the number of white folks from Indiana who've gone deep into Africa, and vice versa. This program is whenever it brings medical students, fellows, and residents from Moi University in Kenya to Indianapolis. And so being part of that, I was there for 2 months, and I was on a psychiatry ward there. So that, I think, helped immensely, of just sitting with the fact that you're uncomfortable. You're the minority for the first time. You stick out. In Kenya, if you get really, really rural and you'd walk, people they call wazungu, which is the raises, the people who go around the circles, because it talks about kind of the colonial cars. And so I think those are some of the experiences that have helped me. I think learning another language, or trying to, I got to see a lot of patients in Washington Heights, in the upper part of Manhattan, where it's primarily Dominican population. I think those are some of the things that come to the top of my head. I would say that in that list, and probably what we're talking about that's upsetting, is I don't think it was my training in medical school. I think that made me aware and cautious, if anything, right? And then, I'm trying to think, in residency training, it's kind of inherent in psychiatry, but I think there's an expectation. You go into therapy and then you learn about your biases, and I don't think that's a sensible expectation for us to have with people.
Right.
I don't think people do that. Bias is uncomfortable.
No, it is uncomfortable, and I appreciate you even having this conversation. And like, I think just you being here does a lot. And I can, and a lot of people can pick up on when somebody wants to learn. And for me, I don't think people who don't look like me, or white people, or people who they benefit from the way society is set up. I don't think that they have to do too much. Honestly, just saying, okay, I don't understand, but I want to learn. I want to know about your environment, things you struggle with. That goes a long way, because with these, the historically disenfranchised, they haven't had a voice, like, ever. So if you get to speak up and have a safe space, like, it does me a lot. Even if this wasn't on camera, like if we were just having a Zoom conversation, it would mean a lot to me. So I definitely want to say that. And I want to switch gears to Dr. J real quick. And this is a question for both of you all. But how has life been at Columbia since this has happened? Like, is it weird, or is everybody kind of walking on eggshells?
So, I mean, I don't practice at Columbia, but I'm active in their alumni association. But I will tell you that I'm in a lot of communication with the people who are there, and I think it's a very unique opportunity for people to start talking about things that are uncomfortable. When I was a resident at Columbia, I got a grant from SAMHSA to study cultural competency. And what we learn in cultural competency is that even with, a Black patient and a Black doctor, there is bias. So some
Right.
studies show that like Black patients will want a white doctor because they think that the Black doctor is not good enough, right? And even within subcultures, like within, if you say Black people, there are many different types of Black people. You can't just apply, the same thing to an Afro-Caribbean or someone who is from Africa or someone who is, African and also, Latina. So, you really have to think about each culture. And I think that you have to start with talking to your patients about what are their understanding? What is their understanding of mental health issues? Do they explain it spiritually? Do they use, things from their community? Is it a religious thing, right? And we don't want to make it taboo. We don't want to say, well, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm educated, or you're just not using science. You want to incorporate a patient's understanding of their mental health issues into the treatment plan. And, I have this example of when I was in training, there was a patient from a different country, spoke a different language. It was really important to get a translator, not just using a family member as a translator, because a lot of things can happen when you do that. A family member might keep some things out, because of their own interests. You want to have proper communication with, a trained medical translator, right? Because you're getting information that way. You want to understand what the cultural and religious or spiritual implications are in terms of their understanding of their diagnoses and their symptoms. You want to understand, how they feel about medications and therapy from their cultural standpoint. So there are a lot of things that go into treating a patient from a different background. And you don't have to be the same background. You could be the same race, right? Or whatever that means, but
Right.
not understand the other person's culture because you just come from different backgrounds. So we really, I don't want people to think that, oh, I need to have a Black or a Latina doctor or a white doctor to understand me. We can all understand and learn and invest in cultural competency, but it takes wanting to do that and acknowledging and admitting to ourselves that we don't know everything. There's an example of, I used to work in Paterson, New Jersey, and there's a very large population from Bangladesh there. And if I were to put on my psychoanalytic psychiatry hat, and if someone was coming in late, I would say, oh, I'm analyzing their behavior. They're late.
Acting out. They're acting out.
Right.
Right. Oh, they're resistant to therapy. But no, it's like in some cultures, being late is not considered, bad behavior. It's like, oh,
Right.
we were praying, the sun was setting, or there are other cultural implications. So, we really have to understand this. And my dear friend, Dr. Alfie Breland Noble, she's written an amazing textbook about how to understand, cultural dynamics in different communities. And she really breaks
Awesome.
down many of the large communities and subcultures in the US. And it's brilliant. And so if you really want to learn and if you really want to change, there are resources. Do people read them? No. Are they funded? Not as much as others, right? But they're out there. And so, we can do this evidence-based as well.
Yeah. And it's funny because I met her, Dr. Breland Noble, at this event in LA a couple months ago. And, we got to talk and collaborate. And I would love to figure out how to take what she's doing, because I love what she's doing. And like, I wish I had that when I was, 17, 18. I'm trying to figure out how to take that and put it to the social media world to where it kind of makes sense, because it's like people won't seek that information out. And unfortunately, we wait for things like this to happen before, we're like, okay, I think we need to talk about, race and implicit bias, but we just kind of like sweep under the rug until the next big thing happens. And then we're like, oh, we do have a problem. So I'm still trying to figure out how to, because I feel like I get it, but I'm trying to figure out how to send it to, the community.
It's on Amazon.
Say again?
Her book is on Amazon. It's great. Like whenever I need to like understand a culture better, like that's in her book because there are many cultures. I use her book, and it's evidence based. There are wonderful tools in there, and like you can start to use some of the snippets to talk about things on social media. I don't know if you know Nadia Adesai. She's like on TikTok. She and I just recently did something on like,
She's
her.
Canadian, right?
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
Canadian.
yeah, I know her.
We just did some collabed on something where like we talked about how as therapists we're like set limits, cut people off, but it's like in certain communities that's not an option. That's like considered disrespectful. You depend on your family members. You don't want to be like basically excommunicated from a community because you're like talking back to the authority figure. So you have to learn how to tailor these really nuanced therapies and interventions to fit within a culture. And if you don't understand, if you're not listening, if you're not curious, then you're basically not going to provide an intervention that's even doable, right?
Right. And before I get Dr. Drew's, take on how he feels things are at Columbia or his interaction with the people there, Dr. J, real quick, with with this topic, as a Black woman, do you feel any type of way, this personally?
I wish I could say like, oh, I'm so shocked and surprised, but I think that because I've been teaching unconscious bias to like corporations and going into places I'm not. And I think that,
That's sad.
It's sad, but at the same time, it's so important just to acknowledge it's there. Like, and I think by even myself saying I have unconscious bias, I'm not perfect. And explaining it from a scientific standpoint that our brains are wired to be afraid of the unfamiliar. So that's why it's just easier for us to just assume. And so if we're checking ourselves, like if I'm going to see a male patient from a different, let's say a specific religion, I'm going to think about, okay, what are my assumptions about that person? And let me check that at the door before my session. It's not something that you're like, well, I did training, I'm good. You got to constantly do it because, that's the only way to overcome this and provide, fair and ethical treatment to people.
No, I like that. And Drew, any thoughts on any interaction you had with the people at Columbia? How are you taking it?
I'm happy to talk about that, but I just want to follow up on what Dr. J said, which is, I try to be active about that process, especially with my patients, to acknowledge, and I think this has really changed for me, to acknowledge, we're from different cultures or different races, or hey, so I usually will ask, can you tell me something? I used to ask like, oh, are there cultural or religious values that, are important to your treatment? Mm-hmm. And like what, there are people who don't have those. And so, so now I really ask more of like, can you please tell me and share with me something about what drives your values culturally, spiritually, so I can understand some of those. And then I also usually try to really signal strongly if there's a difference. I feel like, let's say, I think it's known to most people, I'm a married guy, I'm married to a woman. And so if I'm working with someone of a different sexuality, right, or who thinks about gender a little differently than I do, to really acknowledge my curiosity and also say, hey, if I get this wrong in some way, or I speak about this in a way that it doesn't sound right, feel right, but will you please let me know? Which is a burden on people. I would like to know myself and not have to burden anyone to do that. But I at least try to signal in the process and in the therapeutic process that those sorts of things that are happening out in the outside world in terms of bias and racism and discrimination also happen in treatments, unfortunately. And the only way that we can root that out is to always be open and insistent we talk about it. So, in terms of Columbia and what's going on, I mean, Columbia had started a process of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There were a number of groups, but one led by the psychoanalysts who are really, on our faculty. Columbia is a really, really wonderful mix and a rare mix. There's this really strong psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic community. It's one of the places that, as a psychiatrist, I did thousands of hours of supervised psychotherapy before I graduated. It's really impressive. But they also have all this cutting edge neuroscience. And it's also they're smart. I mean, I'm probably the dumbest faculty member, to be honest with you. It's just like, you know, they're like Nobel Prize winners, a lot of big brains. It's diverse. I think I want everyone to know that this isn't a white guys club. It's a very diverse group. There's a lot of leadership of women, of people of color, and so there has been outrage. There has been, in my mind, a lot of very active and clear movement on the listservs that I'm on of white faculty members being very, very vocal about support, and faculty members affected being very clear about how it's affecting them, the image of the department, etc. So there are a number of petitions going around from groups of concerned individuals, whether it's graduates or of the programs or faculty and staff members. I think there's also the question for us as an organization, you know, to how to understand this and process it, which is really important for us in psychiatry, and not sweep it under the rug. I think part of why I wanted to speak with the two of you is this is a painful thing. It's been horrifying and embarrassing, and you know, if Kojo, who knows some psychiatrists and likes some psychiatrists, even if that causes him to really question our field, which it should, I can only imagine what people who've never met a psychiatrist think.
Right.
Just that said, you know, we're gonna have a different leader of our department pretty soon, and I've heard some rumors, and I just hope they become true. But at least there's talk that I don't think it's going to be a white man again. And I think there's a lot of ways that people interpret that kind of thing. You know, is that fair? Should we be race neutral? And when you look at a history of a storied institution that's only had white male leaders, I don't think we need to be in debate of what kind of changes need to happen next in terms of us to really take the next step and have a mental health system and a healthcare system that everybody feels that they can walk in the door and get care, where people understand who they are, no matter where they're from or how they're different than the people treating them.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring that up, but I was thinking, I'm like, who's gonna, you know, be next? Like, who's taking over? Is it gonna be a white male, or are they gonna make it Dr. J? But then, like sometimes you could say that's performative, right? Like, oh, we just put.
Yeah, you know, it can't be performative. I mean, I think that there's a way that, you know, much like the next Supreme Court justice, you know, I guess you could call that performative. You could also point out, like, hey, there hasn't been black women on the bench, right? Criminal justice issues often in America predominantly revolve around Black families, right? Because of incredible bias. So you know, I think that there's an opportunity that institutions have like this to not be performative, to appoint someone who is going to signal to the faculty that they're welcome, that they're lifted up, that they're nurtured, and that no matter where you are from or what you look like, that you will be encouraged to excel. And I think what's hard is that, you know, that feeling for many people, and I think even many women of color, it has existed at times, right? It's not like it's just been this horrible, oppressive place. So, but that's a little bit of what I've been heard. I think just also embarrassment but mostly thinking about what's next. And what I appreciate for sure about both the hospital and the department is there was very, very rapid communication in some ways. There was a town hall held on Wednesday by the president, Steve Corwin, of New York Presbyterian Hospital. There was rapid action. So it's not like we're sitting around as committee talks. It's like he was removed, he resigned, right? So that feels like they're, especially in the midst of, it's a very challenging time, right? We're suddenly in the midst of a very scary time with a war raging suddenly. So, you know, not that matters, but just in terms of, I appreciate that there was something definitive and quick.
I think that's fantastic, and you touched on it a little bit as you were speaking. But I guess my final question to both of you all is, you know, what is a takeaway point for the people who are watching now, and the 5,000-10,000 people who watch this on the back end. For those people who because when I get comments all the time like, oh, I want to go see a therapist, I want to see a psychiatrist, but I'm afraid of if they're going to judge me, even about the ADHD content that I post, they're going to judge me. They're going to think that I want medications or I'm a druggie. Those are things that I hear. So for the person who was already somewhat apprehensive to go see a psychiatrist, what would the takeaway point be from each of you, to help people know that it's still okay to go see help, and that, like in our field, we are flawed.
I think we talked about this before about how like the way that you would go to a surgeon and be like, how many successful surgeries have you performed? What are your stats? Like that's how we should be interviewing our therapists. What is your experience treating people like of my background? Are you culturally competent? Like, are you just going to prescribe me medications? Do you do therapy? You have to interview people because you're trusting them with your most precious organ, your brain, that controls your emotions, your thought process, right? So you really want to do that. And I don't want people to feel discouraged about not choosing someone who doesn't look like them, because there are therapists out there who will list on their profile that they're culturally competent, they've had training and so forth. And also, if you feel as if you aren't being judged or perceived, in a way, that therapy is a place where you can bring up these themes, right? And a lot of times what's happening in your treatment is also happening in your life outside of treatment. So it's kind of mirroring. So it's an opportunity for growth with your therapist. But I do think that social media is super powerful in terms of, showing the different faces, the different looks of what mental health issues look like. And when you do see something online that's upsetting, that's racist, rather than falling into the category of the bystander, really try to interject knowledge. Don't get into trolling, but look up a fact, because we can all do our part in combating stigma and racism and implicit bias.
That was well stated. That was awesome. You're making it hard for Dr.
No, I was like, what she said. I'm not going to say it. Well, I think that there are a lot of populations that don't get care, right? 80% of men with psychiatric disorders don't receive care. 50% of men, that's the rate of lifetime substance abuse, meaning one in two men will have a substance use disorder in their lifetime.
Wow.
We know that the way that different cultural communities think about mental health care, as Dr. J was saying, is that's really variable, and there's not a lot of trust. I would, I guess, encourage people who are untrusting to the system to acknowledge that makes a lot of sense to me, and that especially when you're struggling with your mental health, it doesn't feel like you're often up to, to make. I think people often make the big decision is to go get treatment, and that's a really important decision, but I think often once we make that, we're like, oh, now I feel better, right? It's like, no, then you got to find the treatment, and you got to find your person, and that's going to help you and really be by your side, in your corner, whether it's taking care of you with medicines, whether it's your talk therapist, who is going to seek to understand you in some ways like nobody else ever has, and hopefully that leads to us understanding ourselves when we're in therapy like we never have before. And that process, if you're questioning it or worried about it, my opinion is it's the way that you will seek your greatest power. You will achieve your transcendence of whatever is holding you back, and you will manifest. That is what, if you're having a mental health problem and you get proper treatment, that is what will happen for you. That doesn't happen for everybody, and there are lots of reasons for that we've talked about today. But I hope everybody hears, watching my encouragement, that their mental health looks different, right? I like that I'm the minority here in this room. That gives me some hope. I like that Kojo is dancing, and I love sharing Dr. J's videos, right? Because I want to tell people this is what we look like. This is what mental health looks like now, right? We're a diverse group and we're open. So that's what I hope. I also, I have this crazy thing that's popped into my head, and I who knows, sometimes we just say things, but I had this image. I really hoped that Naya Kim Gatwich, the Sudanese model who was mentioned in the tweet, I really hope somehow that she could meet Alpha Stewart Arthur Stewart was the first African-American woman president of the American Psychiatric Association. And I don't know why. I just want him to know, that's what we look like.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. And I mean, I'm just so honored that Drew, that you come on here and speak, because you didn't have to do this, because when you have a guest on this show and is this let's say this me, Dr. J, it was
Kojo, I don't think that's true anymore. Do you? I don't agree with you. I don't think that. I mean, I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate you feeling safe with me and the very kind thing you say. But I don't think that we are in a spot anymore where we can't have the conversation. We can't speak up. I think it's part of the privilege of being on these platforms and being in relationship with individuals like yourself.
Right. Go ahead. I was cutting you off. My bad.
That's okay. I'm just like, we got it's if it makes you nervous to get into the conversation, that means you need it. And was I somehow nervous sometimes? Maybe I'd say the wrong thing, or what would you ask me about today? Even though I know you and trust you a little bit, right? I think that there's a way of, again, if it's unconscious bias, you don't know about it, and that's kind of scary. But for anybody worried about the conversation, I think if you show up with an open arms, wanting to learn and be curious, it makes all the difference. So
I think it's great. I think it's going the extra mile, because and this to be real, like Dr. Drew, you could have reposted what the APA put out, and say, I'm praying for, you could have done that, and people will say, oh yeah. But to come on and to give your time, I think that's a marvelous thing. And what you're doing is fantastic. And if people saw it, maybe one TikTok dance, and people say, oh, maybe I'm Black, I'm Latino, but I want him to be my doctor, because I just, I feel comfortable with him. So, this does mean a lot.
Well, thank you for that. And I think part of not reposting is I haven't known exactly what to say. I mean, that's a little embarrassing, but it's a big mix of emotion when someone who you've looked up to, who you've worked for, who's, maybe been your mentor at times. I mean, I spoke to this before I would have big media things. This is the guy I'd call for a pep talk. And
Same.
So, and so that really just, it just messes with your head in a little way. And again, all that said, look, I'm a white man of privilege. And so this isn't however it's affected me is not, I don't think, relevant. It's I think maybe just the point that let's keep the conversation going. And I really appreciate you hosting us, Dr. Kojo, and Dr. J. It's really thank you for everything you shared and said.
And Kojo, Drew and I both teach media at Columbia. So This is definitely going to be in the next course.
I think you all are the perfect people to do it. And I like that this is live, because it's not chopped up or contrived, And I went into this thinking about, this is potentially you all's colleague, So I'm it's kind of uncomfortable, but I think we have to sit in that feeling and really just move the conversation forward.
Yep, 100%. It's not going to get better if we're quiet.
Right. So thank you so much for joining, and for the people who are watching, whether it's the live, video or the playback on the back end, use the comment section to let us know how we can, move the conversation forward. All of us being on social media, and I think we all have blue checks on Instagram. So I know they kind of watch us and they kind of use our information as, okay, this is evidence-based by virtue of them and having this education. So I would love to know what we can do better on our end to move the conversation forward for those of y'all who are watching at home. And once again, Dr. J, Dr. Drew, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.